Pests beware, your fields have heroes. The Pests and Predators podcast is brought to you by Field Heroes and is powered by the Western Grains Research Foundation. Learn how beneficial insects fight pests and protect your crops. Visit fieldheroes.ca today.
The Agronomist is brought to you by RealAg on the Weekend, the Beef Market Update, and Profitable Practices. Profitable Practices on Real Agriculture is a video series featuring Canadian producers who are adopting farm practices to have a positive impact on profit, people, and the planet. Profitable Practices is made possible by support from Farm Credit Canada and RBC Royal Bank. Find out more on our YouTube channel. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Agronomists. It is our annual forage episode. That's right. We get one a year, and goodness, we're going to make it count. Tonight, we're going to talk about rejuvenating pastures and hayfields. When do you make the call, and then how do we do it? So I've got some great guests I'll bring in a moment, but just a quick recap, of course. If you collect those CEU credits, head on over to realagriculture.com/agronomists. Go there tomorrow. Let us know you watched the episode. We'll get you all signed up for those CEU credits. And of course, hey, sign up for the Agronomist newsletter as well. It just reminds you of what's coming up, and it will send you the link to the episode once it's posted and remind you to go collect those CEU credits. So while you're on that landing page, make sure you do that as well. All right. This episode is as close as I could get it to my birthday, and as a present to myself, that's right, we talk forage. And so I get to spend the next hour with some fantastic forage and grazing specialists. We'll bring them in. We've got Grant Lastiwka out of Alberta and Christine O'Reilly from here in Ontario. Welcome here.
Thanks for having us, Lyndsey.
Yes, right. Thank you.
Thank you for saying yes, both of you. Because, you know, it's a busy time of year. All right. So let's start with, of course, where we're at. Well, here we are, beginning of the season. Grant, I'll start with you out in Alberta. Have you been walking any fields? How are things looking as far as in the area you're in for how those hay fields and pastures are looking?
It is very local. And that's one thing I don't want people to throw tomatoes at me, because when it comes down to it, I can speak to certain areas. The snow that fell for some of us just late wise about 2 weeks ago probably was some pretty good moisture with it to get things off and going. Other than that, we've had a low snowfall winter and a low ground water level in the soils. So perennial forage stands are going to be challenged this year.
Mm-hmm. Christine, you've been busy already. There's been some events and some tours and some field days. I didn't get to them yet. But how do things look coming out of winter?
Yeah, we had a lot more snow than normal in Ontario this past winter. So I think so far overall, I'm hearing that most things overwintered really well. I'm waiting for someone to shoot me an email and tell me that I'm overstating things. Someone had a bad winter kill, but no, overall I'm hearing really good winter survival. I know there are some issues with snow mold on triticale in the southwest, but that doesn't seem to be province-wide, but it is bad where it is.
Where it is bad. Yep.
Yeah, and then a little bit on the dry side, but cool throughout most of the not north. But I was up in Sault Ste. Marie this past weekend, and those fields in Algoma are wet. There's some heavy clays up there, and they're still pretty saturated. So, just like in Alberta, it varies in Ontario.
Yeah. I will say, and Pete's here, so Pete, this is your one nod that you'll get, is that I have never seen goose damage on winter wheat like I have this spring. So same thing, a lot of the hay fields, pastures wintered very well. They're looking pretty good. But the winter wheat just seems to be hammered by geese this year. So That's my observation on wheat. I hope it goes fine. But really, we're here to talk about forage, so does it really matter? No, it doesn't. Okay, so there you go. Peter Johnson is in the chat. He does say the triticale is bad here and at Werner, he says. So yeah, definitely it seemed like if it went into the fall, maybe with some good growth, some snow mold issues there. Okay, so tonight's topic is one that we get a lot of questions about, and the two of you, I'm sure, tackle this on almost a daily basis, and that is this question of rejuvenating potentially our hay or our pasture stands, because maybe we don't want to take them out entirely. Maybe we want to see if we can keep them going. Grant, I'll start with you, but Christine, I'm going to ask you this as well. Really, the first question to me is, how do I judge that my stand needs rejuvenating? Grant, is it a tonnage? Is it bare ground? Is it species mix? How do I make that call?
Different for everyone, but all of the above. The fact of the matter, if it's a hay stand, you look at it in terms of years, you look at it in terms of plants that are present, legumes in the stand versus grasses and such, and comfort levels you have with that. Is that acceptable, or is it in fact over the line from where you want to be? With the perennial pasture side, so often we're talking grasses, but now there's been a lot of push to more legumes in them. So you're back to looking often, it could be weeds, an encroachment of that causing you grief. It could be plant species. And like anything, doing an assessment of what plants you've got there and doing some thinking of why they got there is a big step to making a move thereafter.
Oh, Grant, excellent segue that we're going to get to in a moment. But Christine, same idea, all of the above, maybe none, maybe all?
I'd agree with all of the above, but I want to throw in a couple of points that maybe round out the comments that Grant has made. So, particularly if you've got a hayfield that's predominantly alfalfa, the recommendation has actually moved away, at least in kind of the Great Lakes, Ontario, Quebec, probably the Maritimes. It's moved away from years of production and towards lifetime number of cuts. Because every time you cut that hay crop, that's a stress on the plant. So rather than saying, oh, you should keep alfalfa in for 3 years, the recommendation is actually 10 cuts over the lifetime of that crop, or kind of 9 to 12 would be a comfortable range. And for a lot of people, that doesn't make a difference, right? If you take 1 cut in the establishment year, take 3 cuts each production year, after 3 production years, that's 10 cuts. So that change in the recommendation wouldn't necessarily affect the people in those regions that tend to do 3 cuts. But we've got some dairy farms in the deep southwest of Ontario that if they can get 5 cuts, they'll take it. All of a sudden, that 3rd production year, that crop has been stressed a lot. It's not going to bounce back quickly from any nutritional deficiencies, disease pressure, insect pest pressure. So it might look okay coming out of the winter, but you could really lose some yield potential because you're stacking too many stressors on that crop.
Mm-hmm. Grant, in the same way as well, you mentioned, of course, Alberta is one of those areas that, depending on where you are, might be very short of moisture, might do okay. It kind of depends. If you're thinking about, moisture being limiting, does that change what you're comfortable with as far as plant stand and when it's getting a little thin?
It does. The fact of the matter is, like Christine, we've got very variable conditions across a province from one end to the other, and the miles you cover from Milk River to Fort Vermilion in Alberta is immense. Hours upon hours, 17 hours maybe drive. The thought is that when we get into the dry country, people accept a lot because it's so hard to get a new establishment
Right.
and the risk of it. And we'll have people saying it's a really dry year. I'm going to have to leave the stands in because trying to remove them and reseed something, I think is probably going to be too risky. Sod seeding into it to improve it also. Another consideration. So when you're uncomfortable with the situation, you ask yourself, based on practicality, risk management, and pulling that all together, what is the best decision for me? And you make that for yourself.
Mm-hmm. Christine, aren't you glad you don't have to worry about there won't be enough water for it to establish? Because that's not, I'm not saying we never deal with that, but it's rare.
I think, yeah, the timing though, that's the other thing is
Yep.
I do get calls regularly like, oh, I tried seeding it and it didn't catch. Although very often it's, I seeded it with a companion crop and I
That's
took
right.
off that
Yeah.
cut of silage and there's no alfalfa to be found. And that's just because those annuals are more competitive when it comes to water and nutrients. So that's the more
Yeah.
typical lack of moisture stand failure that I hear about. But
Yep.
it's not that it doesn't happen in Ontario.
Mm-hmm. Can we, Christine, let's stay on that for just a moment. Can we do away with nurse crop, companion crops? I really feel like at this point, shouldn't we be better at establishing forages that we don't need to do that?
So I do see the appeal if you're in a situation where you need the cut of forage. You can't, the inventories don't work if you give up that harvest for an establishment year. So I completely understand using a companion crop in that situation. Um, don't do it for a summer or fall seeding. Historically, we haven't
Right.
had quite enough water to get both your
Absolutely true.
perennial crop and
Yeah.
your companion crop going. So direct seeding for summer or fall. But yeah, if you're hurting for feed, I can see a place for a companion crop. But very often, I hear things like, oh, well, it suppresses weeds. Well, if you've seeded it heavy enough and you're leaving it out long enough to suppress weeds, what do you think it's doing to the yield potential of the perennial
Right.
crop you're trying to establish, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
there's a specific place, but as put some thought into it, right? Do you need the
Yeah.
feed? And if the answer is
Yeah.
no, then you probably can get away without the companion crop because,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, highly erodible soil would be the other situation. But really,
Right.
it's putting a lot of competition against the perennial that you want, and that costs less per ton to grow.
I was also going to say forage seed is not cheap. And
No.
so every one of those seeds you would like to catch and to grow and turn into the species that you want. So very important. Okay, excellent point. So it is going to depend. I had someone text just before you went live that they walked their field today and it is their pasture. It's definitely in need of some rejuvenation. So we are going to talk about some of the different ways we can do that. Before we do that though, Grant, you've got a really, we mentioned fertility, we mentioned the stress of 10 cuts or that 9 to 12, whatever it may be. I think, and I think it's really important. We'll go, producer Jay, to the first slide of Grant's that talks about the pounds per ton, I think. Yes. Okay, here we go. And a ton of hay. Because I think sometimes we as livestock producers, and I will include myself in this, because it's a perennial, because it grows back every year, we seem to think that it grows on love and rainbows and sunshine, and that we don't always think about just how much nutrients we're removing with each hay pass. Now, obviously, we can talk about grazing in a little bit, but when it comes to hay, there's a lot. So Grant, when you put these numbers to producers, does it ever surprise them just how much comes off the field in each hay crop?
Absolutely. I loved your rainbow scenario there. The fact
Thanks.
is, when forages are valued as a crop, managed as a crop of value, also a little bit different terminology,
Mm-hmm.
then you start looking at them different. And as Christine had mentioned with the dairy farmers prior, looking at things with a deeper perspective. And the fact is that when we're removing forage from the field, we're removing nutrients. And we're happy to have that forage quality, like the 3 cuts, and Christine even talked about 5. So the reality of all of that comes with you're removing nutrients to be high quality feed for animals. And as you're removing them, how are you replacing them? And that is one of the biggest reasons we see is the depreciation. I'm an economist by heart in spots. Depreciation of our forage stands as we go through the years, and we say, okay, well, that stand needs rejuvenating. And as one of my mentors, Dr. Mike Schellenberg, had said, you need to plan and ask yourself some questions of why. And when we're taking off nutrients, when it's a well inoculated legume, we can supply an adequate amount of nitrogen for a stand to a great degree. And with that, I'm even surprised to see now that we find there is a bit of synergy when you've got a mixed stand where the legume does up its game a little more. In the old days, we'd say, well, what is it, 100% legume or not? Now we say, maybe a 50% legume stand is producing at equivalents of 75% of nitrogen. And the reality is we feed the legume. And so my goal in a stand that's a mixed stand, and with the economies the way they are, and depends who's managing it. If it's a cow-calf producer, so often it's a case where simply trying to keep the legume healthy and productive as long as possible. So it's feeding the whole system, taking care of its little buddy, the grass plant that's there, as that grass plant, of course, tries to take everything it can from the legume and starts early in the spring on it and gets a bit of a jump on it. But the reality is doing soil tests, you actually know, is another background thing to do. And if you're looking at sulfur, you've got to do deeper than 0 to 6 inches to know what's going on, and potassium quite likely. And you'll always be deficient in nitrogen. But now with some of our soil biology and other things, we can discover things deeper. But it is so important to have that fertility mix, staves in a barrel. Don't run yourself out in terms of having deficiencies in chicken or the egg. Why did you lose the legumes? Maybe they starved to death.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to start, Grant, considering the grass in that mix is more like a toddler that is very demanding and takes all at once. And the legume is just trying to take care of it. That's all. They're just the parents and they're just trying. Anyway, Christine, this is not a Western problem. This is
No.
again, I will take responsibility. This is a livestock producer's problem that we sometimes don't give nutrients enough credit. So to Grant's point, and this question comes up a lot, if I'm losing the legumes in my pasture, can I bring them back without reseeding? Will nutrients help me?
Potentially. So I'm gonna disagree with Grant about legumes taking care of their little grass buddies
Oh,
because
love
the
it.
relationship between a legume plant and the rhizobium bacteria that are actually pulling the nitrogen out of the air and making it plant available is that legume is trading sugar for nitrogen, right? Everything needs sugar, everything needs energy to run. And so the way that those rhizobium bacteria get it is they do something useful for the legume plant, right? So that is a biological cost. The legume has to trade some of the sugar it's produced through photosynthesis for that nitrogen. So legumes aren't like Oprah. They're not just giving away all their nitrogen to the grass. Like, it doesn't work like that. So the nitrogen that's entering the system by having legumes in that stand, it's usually through dead tissue, so leaves that fall off after they senesce, or root material that sloughs off. It's when those legume plants start to decompose, that's when that nitrogen that they have turned into protein in their own tissues starts to become available and starts cycling through that system and becomes available for the grass. So sometimes, like, different legumes are a bit more leaky than others. Like white clover leaks a heck of a lot of nitrogen, whereas other yeah, like it's I don't know if it's cycling more or just it's less good at capturing the nitrogen from the, but so there's maybe a bit more nitrogen coming into the system faster from something like white clover. But the point is that it's if there was nitrogen, if we applied nitrogen fertilizer, the legumes wouldn't have to trade sugar for it, so they're going to use that rather than nodulate. So that's why if you overapply nitrogen, you don't see as good of nodulation. So I'm going to disagree about taking care of their little grass buddies because the grasses are better at scavenging nitrogen.
There you go.
The legumes are trading sugar for it. Yeah.
Right. But they are not Oprah, and they are not handing it out for free.
They're not handing it out for free.
Okay. Everybody, we got to keep this all on track. Okay, we've got some good questions that have come in, but I want to go to, because it begs the question of, how long can you keep a stand running? Well, depending on what you're willing to do, you might be able to keep it running a very long time. And so producer Jay, let's go to clip 2 with Aaron Bowman, and we get a good look at one of the fields that really has not been torn up in a very long time. And we'll hear some reasons why in this clip.
You can't beat pasture. You can't beat anything that's constantly growing and constantly sloughing off carbon into the soil. Second, we're not breaking it up. So this particular field we're standing in right now is 18 years old. The worst we do is we come in with a no-till drill 1590. We just basically keep rejuvenating these pastures over and over again, no-till. Yeah. So it's been very beneficial from that standpoint. And we all know that not breaking the soil is prevents erosion and all those type of things. So
another part of the operation and the things we talk about a lot, cover crops, your focus is making cover crops profitable.
100%. So for me, it's always tough when I advise customers or whoever to be putting in cover crops, because how do you make the money? How do you make them pay? Where do you see the value in them? When you add the cattle component to it, you bale it, you know what that price of the bale is worth. If we graze it, I know that that's yardage I didn't have to pay for, and that's them feeding themselves. So it's quickly allows me to make cover crops profitable, yeah, and put a dollars and cents to it versus the long term, hoping that I can see the effects in 10 years from now, you know.
So Aaron, at the center of all this are the cattle and your rotational grazing program. Tell us how it works. Tell us how you move cattle through these fields.
So the first thing you need is a good fence. Like I said, this is 210 acres here, and the perimeter fence is a page wire with electric. And we do that just particularly for the calves. It keeps them in, and the last thing I want to do is chase cattle down the road. And so then what that allows us to do is string out a tumble wheel fence, a front fence being here and a rear fence on the back. And basically the intention is the cows are only ever in this spot for 24 hours.
The Agronomist is brought to you by Profitable Practices, RealAg on the Weekend, and the Beef Market Update. Launched in 2009, the Beef Market Update is one of Real Agriculture's longest-running features. Hear Ann Wasco every second Friday to talk about the beef markets in Canada and the U.S., featuring cattle on feed reports, export data, calf run volumes, slaughter numbers, and more. Tune in to RealAg Radio or on demand at realagriculture.com or wherever you get your podcasts. I would like to state for the record that sheep do not stay in a single-strand electric, and I really wish they did, because that would make everything so much easier. But yeah, if you've got cattle, it's a great way to do it. Okay, so in that clip, and we've got a few questions I want to get to, but in that clip, so 18 years hasn't torn up that piece of ground. That's music to my ears. Some people are like, no, you're giving up too much production. Grant, what say you? Can we manage our pastures so that we don't necessarily have to do major renovation? We can do just rejuvenation, or is there a time where you just got to take it out?
The answer always is it depends, but the reality is that way too often, and we've got people that blame a lot of things on why their pasture stands have gone downhill. And a good friend of mine and mentor, Gordon Hutton, so many years ago, placed 40% of the challenge on management. And the reality of that is you create your own destiny. I've got a stand. This is the 16th year it's been down. High Lake grass stand, actually. And we fertilize to keep the legumes in the stand to begin with and to build up a bank of nutrients. We've managed with a twice over grazing system 3 times at the start, but over the course of the years as water and other things came to an equilibrium, we've gone to the twice over. But this year we went out and fertilized it. We haven't previously, but we've got water lines on the pasture. And as Aaron had, the cows are moved every day and they're back fenced. And with water and fences and everything, lo and behold, our goal is to try to give those plants as much recovery as possible, trying to keep the legumes in the stand. We need that balance of nutrients availability. And as Christine said, when we've got urine and feces, we've got a cycling system there of giving back from the legume to the grass. And that is an opportunity with the animals biting and eating and defecating to put 60% of the nitrogen back. In some places, you'll read that ammonia and nitrogen with an active green growing canopy can be 99% intercepted by leaves. So we're trying to create a system that's more closed than a hay stand. And with that, you've got to have hardy enough legumes that don't get old like me and start breaking down. You got to be strong like Christine and Lyndsey yourselves,
That's it.
so that that doesn't happen. But the fact is, the fertility side of it, and keep doing soil tests so you know what you have. And when I did 0 to 3, 3 to 6, 6 to 12, so nicely the CAFLA group did it for me. I was so spoiled. Did pay them though, by the way. But as it was, I saw the deficiencies were severe in nitrogen and sulfur, and a little bit of potassium in that situation and phosphorus, but not a lot because of the bank that was built up. So we're touching that up now.
Mm-hmm. Christine, so similarly, and you're right. A graze system does return quite a bit of what's taken off, so it can extend the life. A hay system is different because we're removing and we have to put it back on somehow. But at the same time, just because when we graze, that manure and urine goes back on, we can still wear out a pasture pretty darn quickly, even though some of it goes back.
Yeah. And I guess I've kind of got 2 points that sort of tie into what Grant's been saying. One is about the fertility, so I'll start with that, but the other one's about management, so don't let me forget. Yeah, with the fertility piece, Grant showed that slide earlier that had the nutrient removal values for a ton of hay. And when we think about nutrient removal, a hay crop will remove more nutrients than a grain crop because that grain reaches physiological maturity, the plant dries down, it senesces. Some of the water-soluble nutrients leach back down the stem and out the roots and back into the soil. Right. So hay, like hay, haylage, any green whole crop forage is going to be taking more nutrients, and you're going to have faster soil test drawdowns from those forage crops than you will from a grain. In contrast, like Grant was saying, a lot of cycling happens within a pasture because, the number that I saw was a cow will take about 20% of the nutrients that she eats for herself and kick the other 80% out the back end. So there is a drawdown, but it's much slower on a pasture because it tends to be leaving with whatever animals or animal products are leaving the farm. But that being said, I've seen some pastures that have been down for a long time, haven't had any manure or purchased fertilizer applied to them, and their soil tests are rock bottom. Like the kinds of things that make my colleague, who's our fertility specialist, go, I didn't know that was possible. Like, yeah. Yeah, I've scared him a couple of times with, sorry. But, so it is possible to draw those pasture tests down really far. It just takes a lot longer to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then my point about management that I didn't want to forget. One of the key differences between solving an agronomic issue in a pasture versus solving an agronomic issue in a hayfield is you can't just apply a herbicide to a weed or, overseed a bare spot, or you also have to change your grazing management at the same time, or you're going to have the same problem again in about 3 or 4 years because something about your grazing management enabled that problem to happen. And because a lot of pastures are not in those short crop rotations, you're going to see it come back before you terminate the pasture. So changing how you're managing that pasture at the same time as the short-term solution is really critical to keep it from coming back.
Mm-hmm. Great point. Yes, and Grant, I saw you nodding along because I think that really does speak to the management piece. So the management piece, yes, is managing the fertility, but it's also in how many animals you're putting on that piece, how big of an area do they have, how long do they stay on it, what time of year is it, etc. And if you don't change those parameters, whatever pressure you were putting on that piece of land, you're just going to do the same thing over again. And certainly we've seen evidence of that in all sorts of issues. So, okay, I have a few questions I want to touch on. One of them just quickly, and then apparently everyone wants to talk about orchard grass, and that's great. That's fine by me because no one's mentioned the dreaded Timothy, so that's fine. But Mark did have a question about the companion crop, the nurse crop. Does new seeding get hurt even if you put the companion crop at 1/4 to 1/3 of the normal seeding rate? Christine, what say you?
So I haven't seen data. I have seen people who go, oh, well, it's a lower seeding rate, so I'm just going to leave it longer and take it for grain. Don't do that. Please don't do that.
Please don't.
Um, so yeah, I'm gonna revert back to my earlier answer of if you need the feed, do it. If you're on highly erodible soils, it's an option. There's some other approaches you could take, but it is an option. Otherwise, really weigh how badly you need that versus your feed inventory, because it's really hard often to measure yield impacts because we don't measure yield in the first place.
Right. We don't. We're quite terrible at it. But we can say like, hey, it went well. That's
yeah, and I mean, I just wish ruminants came with yield monitors. That would make my job so much easier.
Could we please? Okay, Grant,
That'd be
get
great.
on that. That's your new project. Yes, that would. I mean, they sort of have them, but they don't really, right? I mean, we can measure pounds onto a field and off a field of the animals, but they might be raising young. They might be. Oh, there's so many variables. So you're right. I wish they did have yield monitors. But Ray says maybe Grant can comment about orchard grass. So in that clip, we saw there was some orchard grass there. I think one of the things that will come up in any rejuvenation question is, what do you put back in? So, and we'll talk about some of the ways to do it, but let's say we're overseeding or sod seeding, those sorts of things. We know that there are certain species that persist better than others. We know there's certain varieties within those species, etc. But Grant, there is a question here on orchard grass in the foothills of Alberta. What are your thoughts on orchard grass, or do you have some favorites of the tame pasture varieties that you recommend?
Well, if you're looking at sod seeding, one of the things about orchard grass is it is quite an aggressive little seedling. And it and tall fescue maybe are the two species for sod seeding that have some of the greatest opportunities to step in there and try to find a place, because we know that the legumes are much better than them. Not all, but certainly the grasses are not as good. Work that Barry Irving did at a presentation from the University of Alberta showcased the fact that an orchard grass stand, and it was in the foothills, had captured quite a significant amount of carbon over time. And the reality of that is, I think a lot of it is due to yield, growth. And one of the slides that we might see later on, Lyndsey, we were looking at plants grow soil. And the reality of orchard grass is its ability to stay green longer, as long as it gets the moisture. And that's why so much in Alberta we have to watch, and that's where we look to meadow brome so often, because of its tolerance of lack of moisture better than orchard grass. But when we get into the western country where we get adequate moisture, that our orchard grasses can do very well. The ability more flowering in the first growth, thereafter less flowering by significant amounts. So the quality of the leaf later into the season, animals grazing a lot of leaf, translates to more milk production, performance, all those things. As quality, as Christine talked about, I think a little bit there. The fact of the matter that the hardiness of it is one of the things I worry about. Orchard grass itself, we had a lot of good hardy Canadian varieties, and we've kind of lost a lot of them. So it's a question of doing your diligence when you're picking a variety that you think has got a hardiness, because that is something I do find in a mixed stand. I would say orchard grass lasts better than in a monoculture. And that's kind of surprised me over time, but I don't mind at all having a mixed stand with orchard grass in it. And I do have some stands with orchard grass in it, and they do quite well in east of Highway 2, where we're in varied, but we're running about a 14 to 16 annual per sip right now, inch.
Yes. which we got in like a week last summer. So I'm not bragging, Grant. It was terrible. Anyway, but is this orchard? Yeah, orchard grass is I mean, it's quite common here. There is a comment
Yes.
here,
Yes.
I think, with just about any crop. Once it heads out, some of them the quality absolutely tanks. Some of them not so bad. So where does orchard grass sort of land on that, Christine, as far as if it gets too mature?
Yeah, if it gets too mature, just like any forage species, it lignifies, the quality declines, and a lot of livestock, especially in a grazing situation, they don't want to eat it because they can
No.
choose something better. In a barn, they don't have much choice. Yeah, those late maturing orchard grass varieties pair really nicely with a lot of the current alfalfa varieties, so you can get some really nice hay or haylage off of those. Usually, the number one complaint I hear about orchard grass is in a pasture situation. It gets ahead of the farmer, it starts heading out, it gets really tufty, and the leaves around the base start to senesce, and livestock avoid those clumps. And so usually it's just, does orchard grass match your management style?
Right.
That seems to be the kicker in a grazing situation. For hay, it's a lot easier to manage that, but yeah, in a pasture, it seems to be, are you going to be out there early and often with a regular rotation to keep ahead of that? Because yeah, if you do let it head out the first time, it's hard to get, unless you top the pasture, it's really hard to get that palatability back. But
Right.
Grant is right that it's mostly leafy regrowth after it does head out, so that makes it really nice for maintaining quality if you can keep up with it.
Mm-hmm. And as the great Mike Swerdisky would say, if you're snipping heads off your pasture, it means you don't have enough livestock. So just get
Yes.
more. So there you go. That is, there you go. Pete says match your grazing style to the orchard grass. You know what, Pete? It's sort of true though. At times, you have what you have, right? I mean, if you take on a new piece of ground, or frankly, you take over a field from someone, or if you're like us and you graze other people's land all the time, what's there is what's there, and so it really is about managing, potentially your paddock sizes or your number of head to try and make the most of it. There's also some smart comments about woolly pigs. I'm not going to dignify them with a response, Peter and Mark, but you've been warned. Okay, so Mark says, "Are goat and sheep not the same?" That's enough out of all of you. Okay, so I do want to go to, because so we've talked a bit about overseeding, but I want to go. I do want to talk more about that, because this is the other question that often comes up. And Christine, you sort of hinted at, do we do by patches? Do we do so? Grant, I'll start with you maybe. So if I've made the choice to actually overseed, so to put new seed in, drill it in, whatever I'm going to do, and we can talk about if there's a best way. Is there a best time of year to potentially go in there, Grant?
Okay. This is a recipe, if you want to call it with preciseness, that is more critical in dry conditions than wet. And it also is, in my mind, something that we had many mentors, Christine and I, along the way, that did a lot of things in trying to pull everything together. And in so doing, learned from a lot of mistakes. And now I think we know more precisely what to do. I'm looking at putting moisture events ahead of me as much as possible when I start trying to do something. I'm also looking at the competition I've got, and I want to level the playing field a bit. So overgrazing, glyphosate, other tools are pretty critical tools in the tool chest of trying to set back a stand to give me a window of opportunity, a window of moisture banking, an opportunity for slowing down the growth that can come.
Mm-hmm.
So over the course of years, Dr. Mike Schellenberg said to me 3 times, Grant, have you looked at fall of a time for sod seeding? And I said, well, Mike, I was thinking about spring, and a lot of science has been done on spring, and I know this and that. And Mike said, Grant, have you thought about fall? So after the third time, I said, okay, Mike, I'll try to convince my boss we're going to do some fall seeding. And where he was coming from, Swift Current, southern Saskatchewan, very dry.
Oh, dry.
And
Yeah.
And when you get into other areas, I'm still looking at early in the year when I've got moisture, hopefully to some excess. I'm looking at the other growth not getting too far ahead of me because I'm going to compete with the little guys against the big guys. And when I'm doing that, I'm telling people if I don't do it in November when the soil's 2 degrees Celsius, I'm going to be looking at doing it in April when before the grass is green up. If I've set them back with glyphosate a couple of weeks longer, I've got a little longer window, but a lot of that is because of great concerns of lack of moisture. If I get more moisture, then I've got a broader window of opportunity to play with the timing of when to do that.
Mm-hmm. All right, Christine, I want your answer on this one as well, but we have to very quickly go for our last read of the night. So producer Jay, if you would, we'll play our last read and then I want Christine's answer on this. And then we've got a slide actually that talks about some of these options as well. So producer Jay, if you would. The Agronomist is brought to you by the Beef Market Update, Profitable Practices, and RealAg on the Weekend. Real Agriculture is pleased to present RealAg on the Weekend with your host, Sean Haney, in partnership with Broadco Radio in Saskatchewan and the Chorus Entertainment Network in Alberta. Listen live on Saturdays at 4 p.m. in Saskatchewan on 650 CKOM Saskatoon and 980 CJME Regina. And on Sundays at 2 p.m. in Alberta, listen on 880 CHED and QR Calgary. You can also find the show on realagriculture.com and on the RealAg podcast feed. All right. So, Christine, I'm going to, theoretical me is going to overseed or sod seed into an existing pasture or hayfield. Is there a best time? And like Grant, should I consider fall?
So the short answer is yeah. You should consider fall. I posed the timing question last fall to Dr. Eric Lyons, who is a professor at the University of Guelph. He's a turf grass researcher, so he looks at grass purely as a crop without livestock complicating his life, which sounds dull to me, but teach his own.
Very boring.
But Eric's response back to me was, well, what does the grass want? And I kind of looked at him for a second, like, what do you mean? And he goes, well, if we let grasses head out and set seed, they would naturally drop seed in late summer or early fall. So that's probably your best window if you want to establish grasses in general. Now we know, because like Grant said, there's been a lot of research done. We've had success seeding in the spring. Hit and miss broadcast, but with a drill, you could get some frost seeding done as well successfully. But realistically, grasses left to their own devices will self-seed late summer or early fall. So that's probably the window where we're going to have the best success if we can make that work for all the other things going on with all the livestocky stuff.
And as Grant says, I mean, you can, of course, then also stack the deck in your favor. Like perhaps you're going to overgraze it or push it a little harder so you've knocked back those grasses, put that seed down, those sorts of things. It sort of all depends on what mix you're after. So yes. Okay. So producer Jay, could you bring up, I think it is slide 4 on the rejuvenation options. There we go. Okay. So we've talked quite a bit about the changing management, but there's some in here we maybe haven't talked about as much, and we haven't necessarily touched on bale grazing. And so that is definitely one that I want to touch on, and maybe expanding it beyond just bale grazing, but on, say, outwintering strategies, generally speaking. So Grant, what has been your experience with producers or yourself who are using something like a bale grazing for winter feed on helping to rejuvenate pastures or hayfields?
Amazing. Dr. Kimo Kanye up in the Peace Country Beef and Forage, looked at a number of systems, and the system that was most consistent with rejuvenation was bale grazing. And remember, what you're doing there is you're adding a lot of nutrients to the landscape, a huge amount. You're also changing the time probably and delaying when you're going to graze the following spring and everything. You're slowing that down because the aftermath material and everything is there. And when it is, then it gives everything a chance to get a shot of vitamins, as we'd say for ourselves, cold effects, as I do a commercial here. But the idea that we're going to provide a broad range of fertility, we're going to feed soil organisms, and in all that, we're going to create a soil life and a food source for plants that is going to break down over time available to them. The dilemma with it is at times it can be hard on bunch grasses, icing and snow. Something that Christine understands a lot with snow. I don't because we don't get enough, but we get. I still was yesterday. There's still snow under ice under my straw where we straw bale graze. So all said and done, uh, the bale grazing gives you a lot of opportunities. It's a very dramatic change, but it can create a monoculture. It can create weeds
Right.
too. And we've bale grazed
Yeah.
since 1995, so I'm really armed and dangerous when it comes down to that.
We tried bale grazing with sheep. I don't recommend it unless you've got some cows in the mix, but we unroll our bales for
You
sheep.
should try it with goats,
Yeah.
I think, from what I'm
Well, we
reading in the.
yeah, no, I'm not gonna try it with goats. Goats are not allowed here anymore, even though I love them. You really do need cows with their gigantic melons to just smash up those bales for you. But we unroll, and we've had really great success. Um, we found, certainly depending on the mix, if you had, just wait, you do have to at times be able to deal with the residue that's left, potentially. But really, that was our problem. It was not the system's problem. That was we didn't have quite the right mix. So now that we unroll, we're very happy with it. Um, Christine, one of the things I wanted to touch on was Grant mentioned weeds. We've talked a bit tonight about, certain species dying off, but sometimes you end up, again, management wise, you end up with very weedy fields. Maybe you inherit them. Let's say it was the neighbor's problem. But what are our options if we're trying to bring the desirable species back into the mix if we're dealing with potentially some weeds?
So, first thing is check to make sure that weed isn't toxic to livestock or going to injure them. Once you've cleared that hurdle, a great way often to get weeds back under control is to really increase your stocking density. So you have the same number of livestock, you just give them less space at a time, and that can encourage them to be less selective in what they eat. So they might, depending on the stage of development of the weed and depending on the weed species, they might eat it. They also are much more likely to trample it, and I realize cattle are better tramplers than sheep
Mhm.
are because of body
They are.
size, but
Mhm.
yeah, those are ways that you can try to use stock to get rid of a weed. Um, it depends a lot on the weed, how well it works, because things that spread by rhizomes might just pop up somewhere else. Things that are not palatable, things that are prickly, are going to be avoided a little bit more. So it can work. Herbicide may be an option depending on the weed, and but often with mixed species pastures, you might be taking out something that you like as well, and often you
Mhm.
have to live with that if you're going to go herbicide route. So,
Right.
but yeah, it comes back to it got here in the first place. Whether or not you use livestock to try to get rid of the weed, make sure that you still change that grazing management to keep the weed from coming back.
Mhm. Grant, everybody loves a thistle, a good prickly thistle. But if you've got a pasture, and yeah, how do you deal with thistles?
Goats.
Huh? We're back to the goats, are we, Grant? Already? So soon.
uh, just being funny here, but no, that
They
actually
do
works
eat
pretty
them.
well, to
It
be
it
honest.
does.
They do.
I know. It's too bad.
Christine's comment, the University of Alberta did some really good work, and they looked at, as Christine talked about, the high density grazing and such, and herbicides and other things on thistle. And you are seeing some quite effective control that can come from a mob grazing of thistle and removal of the animals. The fact that you look at some of the fertility things, you always want to have your best crop the most competitive. And when the
Right.
best crop's the most competitive, it is your best weed control. Not all weeds, but a lot of the weeds I know work had done years ago showcase the fact that we can really push weeds back if certain fertilities are applied to manipulate and feed and compete. But whether it's grazing aspen early in the spring, whether it's grazing thistle, and the on pasture website out of Colorado, Kathy Voth, has done a lot of work with animals grazing weeds. And so certain weeds, like Christine said, you got to be careful, but you can train cattle to eat weeds, and you don't have to go out and buy goats. But it that was Kathy's problem. She couldn't convince people to buy goats, so she decided
Mm-hmm.
to work in training uh, the how would I say, the teenagers of the world, your
There you
replacement
go.
heifers,
Mm-hmm.
so that they would in fact be an ambassador of change and change some of the training they gave their future calves and everything to consume more weeds as well.
Mm-hmm.
And Fred Provenza's
Yeah.
lab did a bunch of interesting work on how animals learn what to eat and how to eat it.
Yeah.
I believe he was out of one of the I-State universities. I think he's retired now. But the gist of several trials was
Utah State.
Utah. Okay, it wasn't one of the
Okay.
I-States. Thank you, Grant.
See?
Utah.
No,
You,
Utah
I.
State. Dr.
Your
Fred
vowel.
Provenza.
Your
It's a
vowels close
vowel.
enough.
It's a
Yeah.
vowel.
Kathy was his technician. That's where she got some of that
Oh,
Okay.
from.
okay.
Anyway, enough
Yeah.
said. You
So,
go for it.
so the summary of many trials is that livestock prefer to learn what to eat and how to eat it from their dam. If they can't learn from mom, they would rather learn from some of their herd or flock mates, right? If somebody else is eating it, it's probably safe. It's probably not going to make me sick. Learning by trying something new themselves is usually a last resort. So this is why livestock are often fussy eaters, is because plants could make them sick and they know that. So
Right.
that's why you usually only see them trying things they shouldn't when they're hungry, and nobody threw a bale out on that pasture or moved them in time before they got hungry enough to get really curious. But yeah, they prefer to learn from mom or from their friends. So yeah, absolutely, teaching some replacements what to do
Yeah.
is definitely going to have a ripple effect through the herd really, really quickly.
Mm-hmm. It is
That's where you
quite
need your
remarkable.
flock
Yeah.
or your trip, if you call them, I think, for goats, Lyndsey. A
Is that?
trip?
Oh,
Is that
is
right?
that what it
I
is?
think
I thought
that's,
it was an
I think,
annoyance. Um,
oh,
okay, yeah. Okay, full disclosure, I actually love goats. It's just they are like if cattle are easy to fence for, goats are the completely opposite end of the spectrum. I was once told, I asked, how do you fence for goats? And the answer is you don't. So there you go. That is your answer on that one. Okay, Pete has a question, and he also is bugging me. He has actually been bugging me for years to get him lamb chops. He lives far away. I can't mail them. Okay, but question on how does bale grazing compare to just adding fertilizer? I think this is it's a really good question. Um, Christine, maybe I'll start with you. We don't do as much bale grazing here in Ontario, but definitely there's quite a few people who have tried it. When we're thinking about the fertility question, what do we need to consider when we're comparing bale grazing to just a commercial fertilizer application?
Commercial fertilizer has gotten purer over the years. So when you're bale grazing, you are getting a lot more micronutrients. You're getting a lot of organic matter that doesn't exist in a synthetic fertilizer. Um, so yeah, there's a lot more biological activity happening. There's a lot more trace minerals. There's a lot more other stuff that, as a whole package, can be really powerful that synthetic fertilizer alone just can't do.
Okay, Grant.
I think this just that. The fact of the matter is you've got to watch with the bale grazing because when the frost's coming out of the ground, when you've got more moisture, it can really damage soil badly. And the idea behind when it's drier, we get away with it a lot easier. And we don't have the wet weather, so the bales can stay in relatively good condition as they're out in a field comparatively than if it was really wet. So a different environment where it's cold and dry, where the frost coming out of the ground can do some severe damage. But Christine said it really well.
Hmm. Now, the commercial fertilizer, I suppose, it's faster, but it really is going to be to that, you're putting NPK, whatever your blend is, and that's it. So faster, but it's more focused on what you got. I like it. Okay, there is one last slide that I think I want to leave this on, because I think a big part of this question is on our management and is on thinking about our plants. Producer Jay, it's the last slide, the root slide. I wanted the impact on grazing on roots. And I want to touch on this one because this is one of the other questions that I think comes up. It wasn't this one. It was the one on the picture with the roots. Although we can go back to that one. Glenn Friesen does good work. He was the MC at my first wedding. Anyway, okay, that didn't go so great. So there you go. Okay, yes, and Pete points out fertilizer can cover more acres. That's true. So there is that. But one of the things that I think
True.
we don't always think about in our pasture or hay systems, and for those who think visually, I think this is a really good slide. In every time we run across that field with livestock or we chop it down and take the hay off, those plants have to grow back from something, and that's stress. So Grant, walk me through here, in some of what difference does it make to have big healthy root structures when we're talking about the longevity of a pasture or a hay stand?
The healthy roots are the food stuff that creates simply the exudates for the soil organisms that are present in there. It is the inventory that we're looking at photosynthesis being sent down to the crowns of the plants, more than the roots even. But the roots are going to be carrying out the relationship with the soil mycorrhizal fungi and bacteria, protozoas, and such because of the exudates coming through them. So the more we can feed them from above, and Christine earlier mentioned the photosynthesis products, it's a combination of having leaf area index above and having a healthy root system below, so that plants can extend the root system with their friendships with the mycorrhizal fungi. And it isn't always friendships. As Dr. Shabtai Bittman said to me, at times it's antagonistic. But our idea behind here is leave enough solar panel above. And in our short growing season environments, we are in Canada not as don't have the luxury of having as long a growing season as many parts of the States. But from north to south, the reality is it's very imperative that we do not hamper roots in our earlier grazings. That's why we will go over a stand waiting until about the 3.5 leaf stage on a plant. Then we graze it, taking about a quarter to a third of the leaf area index, and we're positioning for a second bigger grazing. And when we do that second bigger grazing, that we graze quite hard, we take the roots often from the plants to a large extent because of the balancing of that plant not having the leaf area, but the roots that were present become part of the soil pool that the plant draws on to recover. And we just make sure we don't keep those cattle there. So they're going to take down that operating loan in the ground, if you want to call it, that's got all that possibility. So trying our best to manage our timing for recovery and amount of removal that we do in a way in which we have a good solar panel above and a strong root system below.
Christine, this makes me also think about choosing when we turn our animals out in the spring and the damage we can potentially do if we rush that. So like thinking about that, if I've got a stand, that perhaps I know is going to need some help, how important is it then that potentially I wait to turn animals out, or does it not matter?
It matters. There's three ways a grazing manager could cause overgrazing. And most people know that if you leave animals in one place for too long, they start grazing plants that start growing back. That's overgrazing. We don't want to do that. If you bring livestock back to somewhere they've grazed before those plants have had a chance to fully recover, that's overgrazing, right? The third way that you could cause it is by turning livestock out too early in the spring, because the way perennial plants green up, the way they come through the winter, it's the same process as how they recover from a grazing event or a haying event, right? Like, we have snow. Snow changes everything. So that those senesced brown leaves from last fall can't capture sunlight. They can't make sugar. They can't do photosynthesis. So the plant is drawing on energy reserves in the roots and stem to fuel the growth of those new leaves in the spring. And while you're getting, 1, 2, 3 leaves, there's sugar happening that's fueling the growth of leaves. It's only once you've got surplus sugar production that the plant starts growing out those roots, refilling those energy reserves. So this is why what Grant says about waiting until the 3.5 or 4 leaf stage is so important, is that plant needs to have energy reserves to be able to grow back again. So if you hit it too early in the spring, it's going to struggle to regrow, even though growing conditions are usually very good for grasses in the spring. And so, well, sometimes that can feel like an advantage, because at least in Ontario, we often have a spring flush that we have more grass than we can actually manage at that time.
Amen. Yep.
If you hit the same pasture that early, a few years in a row, it really is going to stress those plants,
Yes.
and you're probably going to start losing the ones that you want in the stand, and we get those bare patches and weeds encroaching. So yeah, it is stressful on those plants to graze them too early, and if you make a habit of it, you're going to need to rejuvenate that pasture a lot sooner.
There might be a reason why, your closest pasture is the one that dies fastest, everybody. So just putting it out there, everybody. Okay, we are out of time, and I am so sad, because this has been such a fun episode. It has gone so quickly. Thank you both so much. There's so much goodness in here. So everyone who is very much in the cropping sphere, I say thank you for joining us in the comments, and for recognizing that forage really matters, everybody, and it should be your favorite crop too. Okay, maybe not, but we'll try. We'll convert them yet. Okay, Grant, thank you so much. I know it's a very busy time of year for both of you, so I do appreciate the time. Grant, thank you for joining me here tonight.
Thank you very much for having me. And I feel
right.
very comfortable knowing that you got young people like Christine, because I do know her a little bit and think the world of her. So I think as I'm getting old, I appreciate having people that are taken over that have such strength.
We very much appreciate Christine O'Reilly here in Ontario. And thank you for coming on the show. My
Well,
one forage episode a year.
It's a pleasure as always, and always great to have a chat with Grant. Those don't happen often enough.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here on the Agronomists. We'll be back next Monday, of course, 8 p.m. Eastern, right here. Cheers, everybody.